What's going on, Geeks and Gamers? It's Odin coming back with another video, and today we have another box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw the domestic debut of Dune, which released simultaneously on HBO Max and in theaters, which unfortunately seemed to have cut into the numbers, as the film made just about what many of the industry experts were expecting it to make in the domestic market, which is not anywhere close to where a lot of other films have been. And again, HBO Max has a lot to do with the reason why that is the case, but there is some reason to at least have some hope that a Dune sequel will be on the way because of recent comments made by some executives. But before going into this and also into the second weekends of a couple other films, please make sure you smash that like button. And again, thank you very much for being a part of the Geeks and Gamers team, and make sure you subscribe to the channel as well. All right, so as you can see here from Deadline, Dune spices up with $221 million global cum and expanded release. Now, what's very important for us to remember is that the film had been around $150 million worldwide before this weekend, and so therefore the $40 million it made roughly in the American, or rather domestic marketplace, and the other $40 million it made also internationally after opening up in a huge number of markets, of which half of that number came from China, I think really kind of spells out the reason why there might be some people that are very much saying, oh, these box office numbers, they're phenomenal, they're amazing. If you look at how they're tracking against all these other films, look at how well they are. They're 20% ahead of this film, 40% ahead of this film. The issue, of course, is that they are forgetting that it's been already out in so many markets for the better part of a month, and so it's not making money in those markets, some of which are actually pretty big markets for movie cash, and also it's therefore been out enough for there to be several copies available on Pirate Bay and other places. And now, of course, there is a pristine copy available via HBO Max as well. And so this film doesn't have a lot of other places really to open up in. The only other market that one would consider to be a major market that it will not open up in for at least a little bit is Australia, because of the crazy lockdowns going on over there. But with that being said, Dune at this point does not really seem to be in a prime position to at least get to that break-even number of around $400 million worldwide that it needs to make to get to that point. Now, that's not saying it's outside of the realm of possibility. However, as far as being a financial success, seems to be yet another Denis Villeneuve major epic film, which is actually pretty darn good, yet is still not enough to bring in a lot of the typical normie audience that's going to pay to go see a film. And it makes a lot of sense. This is definitely much more of a niche concept, right? Dune not being, the biggest of all the novels as far as having wide mass appeal. The original, 1980s film also only appealing to a certain part of the demographic, the movie-going demographic. And of course, this current iteration as well, having a very similar tone, I would say, especially with a very long runtime, tends to scare away some of the normie audiences. And so I will say, even though the box office promises, or at least the box office premise or perspectives really prospects is the word I was looking for there, don't look that great for Dune, we can at least look to the fact that the executives of HBO do not seem to be that all concerned with the actual total money that this film is actually going to make. It really came especially from this interview with Variety that they had with Ann Sarnoff, who is a Warner Media chair. And it says here, the plans for the sequel will be based on the entirety of what Dune can do for the company, including HBO Max. And so therefore, they are not looking at, is this film going to bring in any raw box office numbers or box office profit for us, but is this film going to be able to perform well also on HBO Max? And they're going to be looking at those numbers as well before they actually green light. At this point, there has not been an official green light. Essentially, Ann Sarnoff has kind of winked and nodded, saying, well, it says part one, and it ends a certain way, and so that seems to answer the question. So basically, without saying it's green lit, she's saying it's green lit, which is, I think, kind of just this executive speak for not wanting to commit to anything right now, especially a film that costs $165 million. Again, that's a pretty a decent part of and decent level of cash to throw into a film, especially if this is going to be another part two of the same film, the same idea, the same concept, meaning that the overall story will have cost well north of $300 million. Yeah, they're going to want to make sure this film, especially a sequel, is going to be able to bring people back. Because here's the thing. they need to be able to not just make the same amount of money that this first one made, they need to be able to grow that audience as well, right? They already have the prequel series that they're trying to launch in the process of making for HBO Max, and if they want this to be kind of their next major property, their own Game of Thrones, or the next Game of Thrones, I guess you could say, they have a little bit of work to do, because they are not really grabbing mass audiences at this point in time. If you look to a lot of the reviews from regular everyday people, it's been very mixed. There's been people saying it's long, it's a slow burn, and guess what? Unfortunately, a lot of general movie-going audiences don't like those kinds of films. They want films with a lot of action that are usually a little bit more on the quick side, that are easier to digest, and Dune, even the book, which I'm roughly halfway through, is definitely not really made for that way. It's not made for the consumerist mindset that we kind of live in today. So whether or not Dune gets a sequel or not is going to be kind of up to the execs. It seems like it is looking, again, in the positive direction, since they're going to also take into account HBO Max numbers. But if you're just looking at the box office, it really is not all that there. Again, a $40 million domestic, assuming a 50% plus drop-off, which is typical for a film of this kind of a budget. This film might make $100 million by the end of its run domestically, but that even itself is kind of too early to tell, especially, again, HBO Max is going to eat into these numbers without a shadow of a doubt. The $180 million international number, again, it had already made $150 million after being out for a month internationally, so there's not a whole lot left for it to make there either. I just don't really see a lot of pathways going forward to get this film another 180 plus million that it needs to in order to break even. And we'll dive into that number more specifically going into the actual charting for the film. As far as some other films, Halloween Kills makes $90.9 million in its second week of release. This film already profitable after the opening weekend and is continuing to make money. So this is, again, a guaranteed success. No Time to Die, even though it has reached $525 million worldwide, still needs to make another $200 million plus to break even. Though it is coming out in China next weekend, that is obviously going to be a number we have to look at. Remember, when it comes to the China number, that is fool's gold, because studios get very little return on that investment, because most of the money goes to the Chinese Communist Party, who like to fund things like the Uyghur concentration camps. Venom, as I have mentioned previously in other videos, especially on my main channel, that this is a film that is going to make a lot more than people expect, only because of the way it's being released. It was released in a kind of backwards way, whereas with films like Dune, it was released in other places, and even No Time to Die was released in a lot of other places before getting a domestic release. Venom is getting the opposite, where it's getting released in a lot of markets after the fact. And so the early numbers, even though they were pretty strong domestically compared to the first and original Venom film, it was still a film that was going to open up in a lot of other markets. And so this film has already also been able to get to the point of it being profitable, and has actually already made a pretty decent amount of cash. Not likely going to get to the 800 plus million of the first film internationally, but hey, it made money. And I think that in this day and age, to make money at the box office is pretty much all that anyone could ever want in the Hollywood business world. Last Duel, not doing very well. $100 million is apparently the budget for this film. This film's making nothing. So this is going to be a massive loss right here, which, again, not a very good sign for a lot of the films that have come out this year with those kinds of budgets. It's been very, very hard for these films to make that. So 20th Century Studios, which would again be Disney. Now, of course, this would have been a film that would have been in production with 20th Century Fox initially. So whether it's a loss for them or not is kind of hard to tell. But the main story, of course, today is for Dune, and so let's go ahead and look at some of these numbers. And so keep in mind that because Dune has been out for a month, it's going to be very hard really to predict what this film's going to make. You know, as when I make my projections, it's typically based on the first 2 weeks of release, and that's usually if it's getting released in the same markets around the same time. And so it's very hard to make predictions with a film like this, where its release schedule is so haphazard. The biggest issue, of course, is that even though the $165 million is not nearly as much as some of the other films that come out this year, with marketing or typical marketing costs, so not including any delays or anything like that, 247.5 would be the total cost, meaning that the break-even number would be at least $412.5 million worldwide. The $220 million means that this film is still over $100 million in the red. It has a lot of waste. Again, it needs to make another needs to make almost another $200 million just to break even. It's already been out a month in several locations. It's not making a whole lot in the new markets that it's already come out in. I just don't really see that being in the cards. Obviously, if next weekend we get these massive numbers coming out of nowhere, obviously that could change things. And as I said, that does not mean that it's not going to get a sequel just because it's not financially successful at the box office, because the HBO Max numbers are clearly going to have an impact on whether they greenlight officially a sequel or not. That all being said, this really isn't all that surprising because of, one, the subject matter of Dune just not being really a broadly appealing story and topic, and also as well the HBO Max numbers kind of diving into that. So if we ever get any indication of the HBO Max numbers, that might be able to help us kind of figure out the riddle of, will there be an official part 2, or will this be a film that has part 1 in the name without a part 2? I think it's going to get a part 2 personally, but that's again just based off of kind of the winking and nodding coming from the executives over at Warner Brothers. But what are your thoughts about this bit of news? Obviously talked about a few films there, but the big news, of course, about Dune. Do you think that Dune is going to somehow be able to make the 412 plus million it needs to break even? I just don't really see that being in the cards, from the fact that, again, it only made around 40 plus million internationally after opening up in a huge variety of countries, and half of that coming from China. So about $20 million opening weekend from China, and they expect that film to end around 37 to $40 million total by the end of its run in China, since No Time to Die is coming out next weekend. So it's going to have a little bit of competition from some Western films. So it's not going to be able to rely on a huge showing then from China, it seems, and not really showing else anywhere at this point in time as far as any major markets that's really giving it a lot of money. But anyway, what are your thoughts? Let me know in the comment section below. If this video, smash that like button. It really does mean a lot. You're all amazing people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.